Hello and welcome to another exciting podcast with Finance Footnotes. I'm Brent Stransky here with my friend and co-host Zach Miner, and today we're going to mix things up a little bit and talk with you about a foundational element of your investment life. So less about topical news points and more about something you can learn from, and that's talking about whether or not you should buy a home, whether or not a home purchase is a good financial decision. There's a lot happening in the marketplace right now, and if you're like me, you probably heard a lot about this at recent holiday gatherings. Everyone seems to have an opinion, so we're going to start by giving you some data points at the 30,000 foot view, and then we're going to go into some recommendations and also a couple things to be aware of as we go forward. We're excited to share this with you and hope you can take it to your next cocktail party or holiday gathering and have some good data to work from. So that being said, we'll move right into, is it a good time to buy a house? And I thought, Zach, the first thing that we could start with is just a 30,000 foot view. Most of the charts that I'm going to be talking about are from the St. Louis Federal Reserve. So pretty accurate data, I hope. And the first one we're looking at here on the screen is just the housing inventory. And I was kind of surprised to see this, Zach, that the availability of homes in the marketplace has improved over the last, say, 18 months from a low in January 2022 to it looks like it's reverting to the mean. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely has, and you can really see the kind of line in the sand of the pandemic. There is when inventory significantly decreased and folks took it, really availed themselves of historically low interest rates. Mortgage rates. Some clients I talked to, got interest rates into the twos, many in the 3% range. And so you saw just a rush for purchasing homes. And that was also kind of coincided with the work from home phenomenon during the pandemic, where a lot of folks that were traditionally living and working in the cities began to move out into the suburbs and purchase homes that were far-flung regions from where they were typically located. But over the last couple of years, through 2022 and into 2023, as interest rates increased significantly, especially, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, the new homes. So a lot of the building that was ongoing throughout the pandemic is starting to get completed, and so you're seeing some inventory come back onto the market of a lot of new homes. The inventory of existing homes is actually still quite low, and that's something we'll touch on in a minute.
But yeah, and I think the point I want to make is, while the newsfeed says that there's very few homes for sale in the marketplace, it seems like there has been a meaningful bounce from just 18 months ago. So moving on here, this looks like one of your charts, my friend. What are we looking at?
Yeah, I just thought this was interesting. If you kind of go back and you look at a lot of folks on Twitter and social media will always just say how unaffordable it is to purchase homes, and that's true. That's not not a fake thing. That's in the economy. But I just thought it was interesting that these homes that people are buying are just much bigger than they used to be. And if you go back to the 80s and 90s, even the early 2000s, and this wasn't quite that long ago, the new homes that are being built are in if you go back into the 90s, really a third, 30% bigger than they used to be. And so I just thought this was interesting. So it kind of naturally makes sense that a bigger house would cost more money, relative, even if you take inflation into account and all of those different things, the homes that people want and the homes that people are buying are bigger. And so
Which
it
isn't
kind of
always
stands to
captured
reason.
in the government data. They're looking
Right.
at median home prices, not
Right.
square
If you're just
footage.
looking at, if you're just looking at prices, you'd be like, oh, well, the home X in 1985 was worth this, and now home Y it costs this in present day money. It's like, well, yeah, but home X was 1,700 square feet and home Y is 2,500 square feet.
It's great. It's great background. We always say
Interesting.
lies, damn lies, and statistics. We'll be looking at some of those damn lies in just a moment, but keep that in mind.
Yeah. Interesting. And so that next chart is kind of what I was talking about. And this really is peeling apart the housing inventory chart, where the black line is the month's supply. So essentially, how many months the current supply would last on the market to supply the demand for homes. And the black line is new homes. The blue line is existing homes. So the black line is builders, right? Essentially, new houses that were not there before. The blue line is existing homeowners putting their house on the market for sale. And really, almost the entire rebound for the most part, that you've seen in that inventory chart is really coming from new homes that are coming to the market. A lot of that is backlog from the supply chain issues of 2022, where they couldn't get garage doors, they couldn't get windows to finish houses, they couldn't get pipes and appliances and all of those different things. So there was a significant backlog of 80% completed houses that just couldn't be sold, that are now being completed. So you're seeing a bunch of that come into the numbers. And so it's interesting that those they're very two different types of homes, different types of buyers that are looking for them. And if you just look at the inventory chart, you wouldn't necessarily know that.
Yeah, it's definitely a big dispersion there. And a lot of reasons for that, that may be beyond the scope of our call today, as we're keeping a 30,000-foot view for these data points. But yeah, really, really intriguing that, people are incentivized to buy new homes because that's what's available.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, that goes right into, I think, kind of a foundational element, the price of homes. So the next chart I have here, again, from the Federal Reserve, goes right to your point, Zach. We're looking at median home prices. It doesn't take into account square footage in the home, but it's very intriguing, So this data is tracked monthly by the Federal Reserve. It's been tracked since 1963, so it's a great data set. And you can see here, and I know, Zach, you're going to make this point in a moment. Median home prices peaked fourth quarter last year at $479,000. And as of last month, the median home price, $431,000. So it's just intriguing. This is a long-term trend line. I have a kind of a green line there also showing you where a baseline could be. There is certainly a trend upward. Homes improve in value over the long term. I saw some 400-year-old data from Europe that shows the same. So it's not just this period we're looking at. And I do have on the screen here a point highlighted from about 30 years ago, which of course is the typical rate or length of time for the usual mortgage, although they're not always held that long. So in 1994, the average was 129,000. I've got my trusty HP 12C calculator here, and you can see, I don't know if you can see that at home, but that's the average return over that period of time from 129,000 to 431,000, about 4%. Pretty interesting. Just some basis there as we go forward into your next chart here, which is very impressive looking.
Yeah, I'm going to stay on this one just for 1 second and, just point out that there's really kind of two ways for this, blue price line to return to the green trend line. And one is for prices to decline. And the other is for time to pass and prices to remain stable. So that upward sloping trend line could continue on in its current angle, and eventually, after enough time of the blue line just kind of staying where it is, it will also catch up. So I don't necessarily want folks out there in the market to think that prices have to come down in order to return to trend. They could just remain stable, and eventually that will also return to trend. And I think that that's potentially the more likely scenario, because inventory is low, and even though it has ticked up a bit here recently, continues to remain historically underbuilt. And then also that we may have just pulled forward some growth, pulled forward some of those years of 4% growth into a very short time span. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a 15% correction in home prices just to get back to that trend line. So I think that's an interesting thing to just keep in mind if you're saying, oh, I'll wait 6 months, or I'll wait a year, or I'll wait 2 years until those prices come down. That doesn't necessarily have to happen. And I thought that this next chart, very busy, a lot going on here. You can kind of just look at the tops, the peaks and the valleys. And what this is it pulls out just the new home prices, month over month changes. Year over year changes going all the way back to 1965 in new home prices. So this takes out the existing home sales. And again, almost that entire reduction in the median home price is from new homes. And it kind of makes sense as that inventory goes up on the new home prices. They are now being forced to discount those homes because the availability of buyers at that particular level has started to dry up because of higher interest rates, because of affordability, because of those other factors we talked about. So the existing home sale inventory is still tight, and the existing home sale prices are pretty stable. The new home inventory is going up, and the new home inventory prices are going down. And so it's
It's
interesting.
a
They're two very
interesting.
different parts of the market that are operating in different ways.
It's a complex market, and it goes to the point. So we're trying to build a foundation here of knowledge to springboard into our recommendation here. The first thing we talked about, of course, was the supply. To your point, supply is relatively stable despite all the fluctuations that we had during COVID. The second point that we made was home prices tend to increase over longer periods of time. Not every example, but over time. The next point I want to
And
talk about is
and real quick, if pulling that down into just everyday language of folks who may be looking for a home, if you're looking for where the potential for a deal may be, look to the new homes, look to the builders who have all this inventory that they recently have finally completed. And it takes a while to build a house, especially when there's supply chain issues. They were putting these homes and these developments into motion when home sales were booming, right? In the early parts of last year. And now they're getting finished and they're like, the demand is not quite where it was. Prices and rates are a little bit higher. So they're forced to discount those and reduce the prices on them. So if you are looking for if you're in a situation where you're moving for a job or you kind of have to move, potentially looking for the new home sales, the builders, it might be where you would find an ability to get a deal.
It's a great pro tip, and there's plenty of evidence and articles out there that these builders they have creative financing solutions available to help combat some of the high cost of mortgages, which is going
Absolutely.
into the next point, and that's everyone's talking about is these exceptionally high, at least relatively speaking, mortgage rates. And I just want to make a couple points about them. And this data is again from the Federal Reserve Bank. It's going back, it looks like about 20 years here of data, and you can see we are the highest we've been in at least 20 years in terms of interest rates on 30-year fixed mortgages, about 7.3%. But it is coming down from the peak, and I expect that will continue to happen going forward. So while rates are high, ask your parents, ask your grandparents what the rates they had on mortgages. It was well into the teens. So everything is relative. But I want to make 2 points here. One huge value you have here, getting a mortgage in the United States, is that one, you can get a 30-year fixed rate. That's an unusual phenomenon. Many other first world countries don't have that. Number two, you have the flexibility to refinance those rates. If you get a rate now at 7.3%, the bank cannot refinance you higher, but you can refinance them lower. And it's an amazing tool that you have and power that you have in that complex 30-year mortgage system. So just 2 points that I'd share with you. Rates are high, but if you lock in now, they never go higher, but they could go lower.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good point for fixed rate mortgages. I will just point out that, and some consumers may not be aware that when they are shopping for mortgages and they see a 7/1 ARM, an adjustable rate mortgage, and it's like, hey, that rate's lower than the 30-year fixed rate. Maybe I'll go with that. That rate does adjust, right? That rate can go up if interest rates do go up, and I think that's just something to make sure that you're aware of when you're shopping for rates. That yes, the adjustable teaser rate may be lower to get you into it, but that could potentially go up. And I added this the second slide in here on mortgage rates just to zoom it out a little bit. You had it going back until 2004, which I mean most people's experience and time recency bias will look like, oh man, mortgage rates at 7.5%. That's really, really high. But if you zoom it back out, for going back 50 years, that's actually pretty much right on average. 7% or so. It was not abnormal at all, really, prior to 2010. So going back into the when our parents were purchasing their homes in the 80s and 90s, that would have been a good deal, 7.25%. You're like, hey, that's not too bad. So I think I do caution some folks when they say, I'm just going to wait it out, right? I'll buy a house in 3 to 5 years when rates are lower. And I'm like, well, they could be lower. And, I'd say there's a decent chance they will be lower, but there's no structural reason why they have to be lower, right? I mean, and if you look back into historical context, it's like, this is actually normal, where the 3 and 4% mortgages were the abnormal, right? That was the anomaly, not where we are currently.
So
Um,
building on that, I think that's the same thing people say to me all the time. Well, I'm just going to wait till rates go down. And I'm afraid that one consequence of that is if everyone's thinking on that side of the equation, it's going to really increase demand if and when rates did ever come down. If that
right.
does happen, there'll be a flood of demand in the marketplace and supply would remain
Prices.
static. So prices would likely improve. So, that's something to be aware of. All
Yeah.
of your friends are thinking the same thing. It might be a reason to make a move earlier, first
And
mover advantage, et
the
cetera.
flip side of that is that we go going back to that inventory chart of existing home sales is that a significant portion, a majority of the country's mortgages are locked in below 4%. Those people are most likely not going to move, right? Unless they have to for a job or for whatever reason, they're sitting there on a 3.5% mortgage and they're gonna move and get a 7.5% mortgage, so that's gonna keep that inventory kind of tight. Because there's a reluctance to move and to double your mortgage rate when you kind of locked in at 3.5%. So it's just something to keep in mind that the inventory can remain tight, the interest rates can remain high, and that doesn't mean is it going to be 7.5? Well, maybe not. It could be 6.5 in a year or two. But as you pointed out, prices could be 10% higher, right? Or 10 or 15% higher. And so then ultimately you're kind of in the same position anyway.
So great points. Just to kind of close the chapter here on just the first part of our conversation today was just to give you some bullet points, some data points that you can use as a foundation to make a decision. The first thing we talked about is that housing inventory fluctuates, but it's relatively stagnant. It's hard to build homes in a fast manner. Home prices also tend to trend upwards over time. Not every time, but over long periods of time, it seems to be the case. 30-year mortgages are an amazingly powerful financial instrument that we have access to in America that many other people don't. So it's a tool that you can use. We don't know if rates are going to go down, but if they do, you can certainly springboard off of that. The last thing I want to mention here, and this is a new chart for you here, it's just, U.S. home ownership rate over time. I think this is intriguing. This data on the screen goes back to 1965, and you see that it is range bound, Zach. It goes from a low of 63% of people own their own home to a high of 69% in 2005, just before the housing crisis. And as of today, it's 66% as of Q3 2023. So a lot of your friends, family, and neighbors are doing it. So it could certainly influence your decision.
Yeah, and if you pulled this apart by age cohort, that would definitely look differently. So if you had 50 plus, 30 to 50, and 30 and under, the home ownership rates over time, the younger cohorts have been trending lower for quite some time, and that's some pent up demand in the market. Those folks want to buy homes. A lot of millennials that had delayed and delayed and delayed, and a lot of them bought homes in the last couple of years. That was a big part of the buying spree that you saw in kind of 2022 and 2021. To kind of get ahead of these interest rates, but there's still a lot more out there that want to buy them, and so that
Yeah,
I think
I
that's
think
just
there's a
gonna
lot of pent up demand at the moment.
yeah. I think that's gonna continue to keep pressure upwards on prices.
So moving from there into our recommendation, and this is a broad recommendation, which is always dangerous, but be that as it may, here are 4 reasons why we think, I'm a financial planner, Zach's a financial analyst. We spend a lot of time talking about this. This could be your most important financial decision, at least one of them, who you marry, how much you save, and then of course, did you buy a house or not? So we have 4 reasons here. Some of them you may know, some of them you may not, but I wanted to kind of highlight them from a high level, and the first one is an inflation hedge. I don't think this is one that often gets a lot of press or gets in a light at all. But if you look back, this is the data going back to 1993. This chart, again, from the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, and it's showing you about what you could expect the rent price to be. So your alternative, of course, opportunity cost is to rent, but then your rent goes up every month or every year or 2 or 3, right? So this is very intriguing. From if you bought a house in 1993, of course, you fix your rent so it never goes up again unless you refinance. But in this example, you don't. If you didn't, your rent would have gone up 2.7 times over that 30-year period. So for a quick example, median U.S. rent this month is almost $2,000, $1,978, and that's according to rent.com. If you went back to 30 years, $732. So that's obviously a huge increase. The first point I'd make is that everyone's talking about inflation now more than ever in my career, probably yours too, Zach. One way to protect yourself from inflation is to lock in your housing costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had just seen this statistic the other day. So since 1985, rents have increased 208% and inflation is increased 149%. So rents have actually outpaced the inflation rate since 1985.
Really intriguing stuff. In fact, I was on rent.com this morning to kind of pull out this factoid, and I was surprised to see, and we actually talked about this last podcast. A big component of inflation data from the government is housing costs, which are based on rents, down year over year, according to this website. So that's going to start affecting the inflation numbers a little bit. But that being said, it's hard to argue this trend. That's a 2.7x increase over this 30-year period. It's a big part of your expenses and a decent way to lock in inflation-proof your rent.
I'm gonna do a live chart increase or a live chart insert here for you.
Okay.
This is the first for Finance Footnotes. So I'm gonna dive this in there because there is a component to this rent versus buy calculation, and you're looking at the kind of cost to buy versus the cost to rent. And one thing to note, and I would be remiss if I did not point it out, is that is at its widest dispersion, where purchasing is at its most expensive relative to renting in really since this data has been collected going back into the 70s. So this takes Case-Shiller, which is a valuation metric for home prices, puts in the cost of renting, and so it's a very interesting calculation that you have to make when deciding which to do. So I thought it was helpful to definitely point this out.
And it's a great indicator. It kind of goes to the point that our homes are overvalued at the moment. I don't actually make that point in this conversation, but it's good to add it in there. We're taking the long-term approach here. When you buy a home, I'll make that point later. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that chart myself because I haven't seen it yet.
It's in there, slide 14.
Unbelievable. Oh, wow. Amazing. There it is. How fun. This is real time.
Real time.
Yeah. Great chart. All right, cool. I'm moving along here.
And again, going back to mean reversion, there's two ways for this to mean revert, right? The cost to buy can get cheaper, or the cost to rent can go up while the cost to buy remains stable. So you will only know in hindsight, 10 years from now, what was the right decision, right? Because you could buy today and then rents significantly accelerated through that period, and then you'd be behind, right? So you always see something like this, and yes, mean reversion is likely because it usually happens, but there's two ways for that to happen.
Yeah, really great chart here. So kind of building on that, just number two, the reason why I think it's prudent to consider buying a house for your long-term financial stability, it's forced savings, right? You are contributing your mortgage rate, of course, which has gone up because the interest payments have gone up because mortgage rates have gone up, but there is a component that's going towards principal. And of course that increases as a percentage of your mortgage payment the further you are into your mortgage. But I saw some interesting data here. This is from the U.S. Census. It was released in June of this year, but it's 2-year-old data. So it says 28.5% of the median American's net worth is from equity in their home. I'm moving along here to a second chart, and this actually has the breakdown of all components of wealth in 2021. And the only element of assets that was worth more were retirement accounts, possibly 34% of the median person's net worth. But depending on home prices, could be up to a third, depending on where you live. If you live in expensive communities, it's probably well over half of your net worth tied up in homes. Forced savings, it's a systematic savings into your home equity month after month. So I think it's probably a good way to increase net worth over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually probably my favorite one. My favorite reason is really because
did you see reason number 4? I added it last minute, so may have to. All right,
I'll get back to that.
Come back.
It's because it's a zero sum, right? You're either going to rent or you're going to buy. It's not like you can't do either one. And so this puts you in a position to diversify your holdings, diversify your investments, because a home is an investment. And we, there's plenty of like talk out there. It's like, oh, your home's not an investment, but they're comparing it to like public equities, right? They're comparing it to that. When you compare it to renting, well, of course it's an investment, because the renting, there is no investment in that. So I do like the concept of forced savings. It kind of makes you put money into an asset, where the alternative is to rent.
I think this one gets a lot of play, right? It's forced savings. It's a zero sum game, like you said. The my number three reason why you can or could or should buy, if all things are equal, is leverage. And this is one I don't think gets much play. Leverage, as you may know, it's an advanced financial tool, but it's very common in U.S. mortgage, and it's what you're doing. When you put down less than 100% down payment, you're using banks' leverage to purchase the rest of the home, right? So I did some research this morning. Average down payment for first-time home buyers in the country is about 6%. And if it's not your first time, if you include all home purchases, closer to like 17%, Zach, which is intriguing. Some people as low as 3%. So I wanted to give a quick example of why I think this is important. So if you're using a 6% down payment, your de facto leverage is about 16 times leverage, meaning you're putting in 1/16 and the bank's putting in 15/16. So if the average home price is $430,000, we looked at that a previous slide, you're making roughly a $26,000 down payment. If the home goes up 5% in value, your equity increases from 26,000 to about 48,000, which is an 82% increase. So while the value of the home went up 5%, your value in equity went up 82%. So that's an element of how leverage works. Of course, it works in reverse, which is a dangerous component of how people can go underwater in their mortgage. We'll talk about it at the very end, about that risk at the very end. But in general, over a longer period of time, home prices increase in value, and you benefit from the leverage that's associated with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only thing I have to add on that is really what we'll talk about with the kind of the 5-year concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have some disclaimers at the very end here. So we talked about a couple of ideas here. The first one was, of course, it's an inflation hedge. You're locking in your rent payment for the next 30 years or more. And of course, at the end of the mortgage, if you pay it off, heck, it goes down to just your taxes and maintenance. And then we talked about it's a forced component. It's almost 30% of the average person's net worth. And then you get the value of leverage, a very complex tool, but useful and very common in mortgages. And then finally, this is the last one I added in, Zach, last minute. It's the tax benefits, and I almost forgot about this one, but my God. And again, please confirm with your CPA. This is not tax advice per compliance, but IRS Section 121 exclusion. If you're a married couple and you live in a home for more than 5 years, you have the right to get that first $500,000 of equity tax-free. So the government does not tax you. It's an incentive the government gives us to buy a home and keep a home for a long time. You can roll all the equity into a new home purchase, or you can, let's claim up to $500,000, $250,000 per person, $500,000 per married couple. It could be one of the biggest tax benefits or incentives in the IRS code, and it's something that you only take advantage of if you own a home.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something as financial planners, and we're kind of in this stuff on a day-to-day basis. So we kind of just know that. But you'd be surprised, and a lot of clients I talked to didn't know that this was a thing. That your primary home was essentially kind of that first 500,000 of it of any gain was essentially tax-free. And I've had conversations with folks where they were like, we're thinking about moving, and they're kind of doing calculations, and we're talking about it. And it's like, yeah, and I'm gonna pay tax on that. I was like, well, no, we will not pay tax on that. And a lot of times that could be like an extra $100,000, right? That they didn't know that they were going to have. And that goes into a lot of these calculations when they're deciding what to do. So
if you're following along if you're following along on YouTube here and looking at this particular graph I have here, it's just literally a screenshot of the IRS website, and I have a link there at the bottom if you want to go check it out. But it does have some of the exclusions there. But wow, if you get those exclusions right, it's a huge advantage over time. And not only would your home improve in value over time, but it could under most circumstances or some circumstances be tax-free to you. And I think
Right.
$500,000 for a married couple, that covers the vast majority of Americans and their home equity.
Right.
So we talked about four great reasons. I think at least two of them are not as often talked about at the holiday dinner table, right? But I think these are four excellent reasons that you can make a point to most people that it's a good time to buy a house. This is outside of the height in the market, and where things are the expensive versus normal periods of time. Will there be a version of mean? Taking that out of the conversation because we just don't know.
Right.
But what we do know is that we don't like to speak in definitive terms ever, especially you and I, Zach. I think we're especially careful about that, as we should. But we've seen things go sideways when that wasn't the case. I want to add two important reasons why you should not buy a house. Okay. And if you fall into this category, maybe you should hold off and improve your situation a little bit and then kind of go forward. The first one, 28% rule. This is pretty common in financial planning. Your payment shouldn't be more than 28% of your gross income. This is before your taxes, et cetera.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
35% of your total debt payment. So 35 to 45%. So if you don't have student loans, if you don't have credit card debt, or if you don't have a car payment, for example, maybe the 28% rule isn't affecting you, but most people do have those things. So it's certainly a rule that banks consider when you're applying for a mortgage.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm a fairly naturally conservative person. So even when I'm communicating with clients, I like to see it closer to 20%. And that kind of covers, increases in debts that you may not foresee, income losses that may happen, big expenses, the ability to still save and to just feel comfortable. Because the last thing you want to do is make a large commitment like a home purchase and then just feel uncomfortable all the time because
Was
you
that house
having
rich,
trouble affording it.
life poor, or something? What's
Right.
that
Yeah.
expression? I think I
Yeah,
butchered
absolutely.
it.
And so I like, 28% is like, if you're above that, like that's a pretty good indication that you can't afford it. But I really like to see it closer to 20, to just have that wiggle room in there and to be able to live in your home and feel comfortable, with the affordability of it.
Everyone's financial situation is different, and the
Of
28%
course.
rule is a benchmark
Of
for
course.
consideration, right? So take that into consideration. Banks and mortgage companies certainly do, and you should too in your financial planning process. The second rule I think is as important. It's the 5-year rule. Okay, I don't think this is as black and white. I mean, maybe you won't find the 5-year rule when you Google it, but it's true of any investment. People come to us, Zach, all the time. What should I invest in? Well, first question that I ask them is, well, what's your time frame? What are your goals, right? If
Right.
need this money in 6 months, well, then you should be investing in something safe that's stable. And this is a huge financial asset for most people. If there's a good chance you're going to move in the first 5 years, obviously unforeseen things happen. You shouldn't buy. It's like any investment. You shouldn't commit to something like this if you're going to be gone in 5, maybe even 7 years. And I think there are two major reasons. First one, we already talked about it. The IRS rule, there are exclusions for that $500,000 tax benefit. You have to be in place for 5 years. There are certain exceptions. Talk with your financial planner and accountant about those. But to get the benefit, most of the time, you've got to be in place for at least 5 years. And then secondly, we saw this in the housing crisis. We're seeing it a little bit now in the last year. Home prices have come down a little bit, to your point, Zach, mostly by new homes. But this would help you avoid the fluctuations that are natural in any market, including the housing market. So I think 5 years to 7 years is a good time. It's a good rule to put in place here as you're just making this decision for yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I've had several conversations with folks over the last year or so. And yeah, anecdotally, even with myself and my family, we moved early last year, and I wouldn't characterize it as a deal, right? But this is our home for ideally for the next 20 or 30 years, right? So did I get an amazing, fantastic price on it? No, not great, right? Relative to history. But from our perspective, it was within that number one, right? It was in that percentage range where we felt comfortable affording it. And then number two, we're gonna plan to be there for a very long time, for decades, and the span of decades. Yeah, I think we're okay with the price that it was at.
And then
And
hopefully you'll
so,
start benefiting from the benefits we talked about. Like you've
right,
fixed your rental rate, your mortgage rate, your income will go up, hopefully your finances improve, of course, like all of
right.
ours. And then your mortgage payment stays the same.
Right. And and this goes back to that leverage question, where if you do purchase a home with significant leverage, which, a 5% down payment, I think, can be characterized as significant leverage, and you're saying, okay, well, I might move in 2 years, or I might need to move in 2 years. It's like, well, then that leverage could cut the wrong way for you, because you could be in a situation where prices go down only 5%, 7%, but now you have negative equity. And now, in order to move, you'd have to put up more money. There wouldn't be anything to roll into a down payment on something else. You'd actually have to put up money in order to move. And so I think those two things go hand in hand. The amount of leverage that you use versus the length of time that you're planning to stay there. And as you mentioned, unforeseen things happen. Sometimes there's nothing you can do about a move. But those two things kind of go hand in hand. So and maybe if you put up a higher down payment, you could potentially have some room there where maybe you don't necessarily need to stay in it as long as decades to recoup that. So I think those two things go hand in hand.
I think they're good rules of thumb, if you will. Taking a step back from summary, we introduced several concepts about the housing market in general that hopefully you can find valuable. We introduced 4 reasons why it's probably accretive and beneficial to you from a financial perspective to own a home. We didn't talk about any of the emotional components of that, which of course there are many. And we give 2 reasons why you might want to pause that decision. And of course there are others. This is a general conversation. There's maintenance, there's taxes on homes, et cetera, things that can happen, water mains burst, et cetera. But I think in general, for most people, it's a huge component of their overall net worth and investment success. If you look across the country, over 2/3 of people at the moment own their own home. And it's been by and large, an excellent financial decision for the majority of them.
Yeah. And there's so much that we could add to this, right? And this is a conversation you can have for hours on end. And really, I'll just kind of finish it up with buying a home is a different type of investment than I think anything else. When you're purchasing something in your retirement account or an equity or a mutual fund or something like that, I think buying a home has that just much more emotional quality to it. Think about what your quality of life is going to look like. What's your commute going to look like, right? What's the school district? What are your neighbors like? Is there sidewalks? Like, there's so many different things that go into it, rather than just, is this a great price? Is this a good price? And what is my return? Right. So I think that there's just so many more things, so many more mitigating factors to determining what is the right price for you when it comes to buying a house. And so I would just say, for a lot of folks out there who are, coming to us and asking for advice, we're like, I think I'm just gonna wait. I think I'm just gonna wait. And sometimes that is the right thing to do. Right? Don't get me wrong. But I would also just, take into consideration that, prices don't need to come down, rates don't need to come down. And if you come across a situation that is right for your family at a price you can afford, maybe it makes sense.
Great points to end on. Like you mentioned, is a very nuanced conversation with a lot of variables. If you have questions, let us know. We're happy to speak with you about them. Thanks again for joining us on an exciting episode of Finance Footnotes. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
All righty.